"She's replaceable," Richard said, and then laughed. And two other people in the room laughed with him, and the sound of it came through the glass partition with the particular clarity of something you were never meant to hear, but that was always true. Celeste was standing in the hallway outside the Vantage Group boardroom with a folder of documents she had been asked to deliver, which was not her job, but which she had agreed to do because she had spent 7 years at this company, agreeing to things that were not her job in the particular way of someone who has been told, repeatedly, and without words, that proving usefulness was the same as earning worth. She stood there for 3 seconds, maybe 4. Through the glass she could see Richard Hale at the head of the table. Chief executive, 14 years in the role, the kind of man who had been powerful long enough that he had stopped distinguishing between his opinions and facts. He was gesturing as he spoke. She could see the backs of heads she recognized. The CFO, 2 board members, the head of acquisitions. She could see their shoulders moving with the laughter. She could not see what they were looking at, which was a presentation deck summarizing the strategic review she had spent 4 months building. The one she had submitted through the correct channels, to the correct people, in the correct format. The one she had been told was being considered at the highest level. The one that had apparently become, in that room, a prop for a joke about the person who wrote it. She set the folder down on the side table outside the door. She straightened it until its edges were parallel with the edge of the table. Then, she walked back to her office, which was not on this floor, and she sat down and opened her laptop and looked at the screen for 30 seconds without seeing it. Then, she opened a new document and began to write. Her name was Celeste Warwick, and she was 36 years old, and she had joined Vantage Group as a junior analyst 7 years ago with a first-class degree, a postgraduate qualification in corporate finance, and the kind of structured intelligence that made certain kinds of problems feel less like obstacles and more like invitations. She had been promoted twice. Her title was Senior Strategic Analyst, which sounded more significant than it functioned, because the strategy division at Vantage operated as a research engine for the executive team rather than a decision-making body, and the distance between producing the thinking and being credited with it was, at Vantage, a distance measured in floors and salary bands, and the gender of the person presenting the slide. She had known this for years in the way you know things you are not yet ready to act on. The boardroom glass had made it impossible to unknow. What she wrote in the new document that afternoon was a letter. Not to Richard Hale. Not to HR. Not to the board. She wrote it to herself, which was something her mother had taught her, that the first honest accounting always had to go to yourself, before you decided what to do with the truth. She wrote down what she had heard and what she had felt, and what she had been tolerating, and for how long. And when she finished, she read it back, and the reading of it did something to the part of her that had been making itself patient for 7 years. She closed the document. She opened her email. She sent one message to a private address that contained 4 words, "I'm ready to talk." The response came in 11 minutes. The person she had emailed was a woman named Harriet Cross, who was 71 years old and the founder of Warwick Cross Capital, which was a private investment firm that managed a portfolio she did not discuss publicly, and that Celeste knew about for a reason that had nothing to do with her work at Vantage. Harriet Cross was Celeste's maternal great-aunt, a fact that existed in Celeste's life the way certain structural facts exist, foundational, load-bearing, almost never discussed, because its implications were large enough to require careful handling. Celeste had never used the connection. She had made this decision at 22, deliberately, and with the full understanding of what she was choosing, because she needed to know what she was made of, in a room where no one knew who her great-aunt was. And she had spent 14 years finding out. She knew now. She had enough data. They met the following Saturday at Harriet's house, which was the kind of house that had been owned by the same family long enough that it had stopped trying to impress anyone and had become instead simply itself, worn in the right places, full of books, smelling of coffee and old paper. Harriet was a small woman with large eyes and the particular quality of attention that belongs to people who have spent decades listening to what is said underneath what is being said. She poured tea and looked at Celeste across the table and waited. Celeste told her everything. The 7 years, the strategic review, the 4 months of work, the boardroom glass, the laughter, the word. She told it plainly, without performance, the way she had written it to herself, as a set of facts requiring a decision. Harriet listened without interrupting. When Celeste finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You know your grandfather left me his shares when he died," Harriet said. "I know. And you know I've been acquiring since then." "I suspected. I own 31% of Vantage Group." Harriet set her cup down with the steadiness of someone making a precise movement. "I have been waiting for the right moment and the right person to do something useful with that position." She looked at Celeste. "I've been waiting for you to be ready." The room was very quiet. "What does ready look like?" Celeste asked. "It looks like what you just described," Harriet said. "Knowing what you are, knowing what they think you are, and deciding the gap is no longer acceptable." Celeste looked at her great-aunt across the table and thought about the boardroom glass and the laughing shoulders and the folder she had set, down with its edges parallel, and she thought about 7 years of being excellent in a building that had decided in advance what excellence was allowed to look like. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said. What followed was 8 weeks of the most concentrated work of her life. She could not tell her colleagues. She could not tell her friends. She went to work every day and sat at her desk and did her job, including, with complete professionalism, a revised version of the strategic review that Richard Hale's office requested after the first version was apparently deemed too ambitious in scope. And then she went home and worked on the other thing. The real thing. The architecture of what was coming. Harriet's legal team was discreet and precise. The share structure of Vantage Group was more complicated than its public filings made obvious, and the accumulated position that Harriet had been building for 11 years was distributed across 3 vehicles that had never triggered a disclosure threshold individually. The consolidation, the moment when those positions were formally combined and the resulting majority stake became visible on the register, required a sequence of steps that had to happen in a specific order and could not be reversed once begun. It happened on a Tuesday. The notification arrived at the Vantage Group registered office at 9:17 in the morning. Celeste was at her desk when it landed, and she knew it had landed because her phone buzzed with a message from Harriet's lawyer that said simply, "Filed." She went to get coffee. She stood in the kitchen on the 4th floor and made herself a cup with the machine that was always slightly too slow, and she looked out the window at the city. And she thought about her grandfather, who had built this company from 12 employees and a rented office, and who had died when she was 17, and who had taken her to the office on Saturday mornings when she was small, and shown her the building the way people show children things they want them to love. She had loved it. She had loved it for 17 years before she understood what it had become, and for 7 more years while she worked out what she was going to do about it. She went back to her desk and waited. The emergency board meeting was called at 11:45. She was not invited, which she had expected. She watched the executive floor above her light up through the ceiling she could not see but could feel. The specific atmospheric pressure change of an institution in the first minutes of a shock it had not prepared for. The CFO walked past her office at 12:10 with the expression of someone whose morning had been disassembled and who was trying to reassemble it while walking. Richard Hale's assistant came to her office at 2:30. Richard would like to see her. Now, if she was available. She was available. The boardroom looked different from the inside. She had delivered documents to its exterior for 7 years and sat in it 3 times, twice for presentations she had prepared, and once for a firm-wide session she had been added to at the last minute. It had always had the quality of a room she was in on a temporary basis, a room whose permanent occupants were elsewhere and would be returning shortly. She sat down, and it did not feel that way. Richard Hale was at the head of the table, and he had the look she had seen on powerful men only when something structural had changed. Not anger, which required a belief that the situation was still negotiable, but a kind of effortful stillness. The stillness of someone managing the distance between what they believed was true this morning and what was true now. 2 board members were present. The CFO. The head of legal. Celeste, Richard said. I think you understand why we've asked you here. I do, she said. We received a notification this morning from Warwick Cross Capital indicating a consolidated majority position in Vantage Group. 34%. He paused. The principal of Warwick Cross Capital is Harriet Cross. Another pause. Who is your great-aunt? Yes, Celeste said. You've been employed here for 7 years, he said. In 7 years, you didn't think it was relevant to disclose. I disclosed it during the recruitment process, she said. It's in my original HR file. Page 3 of the background documentation. I noted the family connection and confirmed that no shares were held in my name, which was and remains accurate. She let that sit for a moment. I imagine the file is still accessible. The head of legal was already looking at something on his phone. Richard looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has been correct about most things for a long time and has just encountered the specific texture of being wrong. What does Harriet Cross intend to do with the position? He asked. That's a question for Harriet, Celeste said. She'll be in touch with the board directly. I understand she's requested a meeting for Thursday. And what is your role in this? She looked at him across the table that she had stood outside for 7 years. She thought about the glass partition and the laughing shoulders and the word he had used. She thought about the folder with its edges made parallel before she walked away. She thought about the Saturday mornings in this building when she was small, before she knew what buildings cost and who paid for them and whose labor disappeared into whose success. I'm a senior strategic analyst at Vantage Group, she said. That's my current role. He heard the word current the way she had intended it. She watched him hear it. Celeste, I think we should wait for Thursday, she said. I don't think this is a productive conversation to have without Harriet present and without the full board. She stood up. She thanked them for their time, which was a habit she intended to review, and she walked back to her office and sat down and looked at her screen. Her hands were steady. She had not been sure they would be. Harriet arrived on Thursday with her lawyer and 2 advisors, and the boardroom was full in a way it was not usually full. The particular fullness of a room where everyone present understands that something is being decided that will not be undecided. Celeste sat in the room this time, at the table, because Harriet had requested her presence specifically, and because the board, understanding the new arithmetic of requests, had agreed. Harriet spoke for 12 minutes. She spoke about the company's origins and its current strategic position, and 3 specific areas where she believed governance had drifted from the principles that made the company worth building. She spoke about the composition of the executive team and the decision-making structures and the cultural conditions that produced, among other things, 4-month strategic reviews that were mocked by the people who received them rather than implemented. She did not name the boardroom conversation. She did not need to. She proposed 3 changes. The first was a strategic oversight committee with genuine authority. The second was a formal review of senior leadership performance against updated criteria. The third was the appointment of a new head of strategy, reporting directly to the board, with the institutional access and decision-making weight the role required but had never been given. She named Celeste for the third. Richard Hale did not laugh. The board voted on the structural proposals that afternoon. 2 members voted against. 4 voted in favor. Richard abstained, which was its own answer. The announcement went to the company the following Monday. Celeste read it in her office, the office she would be leaving for the one on the executive floor that the facilities team had already begun preparing, and she felt the particular satisfaction not of revenge, which required the other person's diminishment to be the point, but of correction. The record, amended, the value, correctly attributed. She called her mother that evening. "Thursday," her mother said. "I want to hear everything, not on the phone." Thursday, Celeste agreed. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the Saturday mornings and the building and the love that had been, under its surface, a form of preparation, as if he had known, or hoped, or simply wanted her to understand what she was connected to before she was old enough to choose what to do with the connection. She thought about the word replaceable, moving through glass, landing in a hallway where she was standing with a folder that was not her job to carry. She had been carrying things that were not her job for 7 years. She understood now that this was over, not because she had proved something to the room. The room's opinion had never been the point, but because she had stopped needing to. The inheritance was not the shares. It was not the boardroom seat or the title or the executive floor. It was what her grandfather had tried to give her on those Saturday mornings, what her great-aunt had been quietly holding in trust across 11 years, what her mother had been building toward in every conversation that ended with, "You know what you are." She knew what she was. She had always known. It had just taken 7 years and a glass partition and 4 seconds in a hallway and 1 letter written honestly to herself before she was ready to let the room find out. The folder was still on the side table outside the boardroom. She had never gone back for it. On Tuesday morning, she walked past it on the way to her new office, and she picked it up and carried it with her. Because it was hers. Because the work inside it was hers. Because everything she had made and carried and delivered and been diminished for was hers, and she was not leaving any of it in a hallway. Not anymore.